began playing guitar when I was 12 years old. By the time I was 14, I was into hard rock and heavy metal and playing as loud and as fast as I possibly could. This is called, in the guitar world, shredding, playing very fast and very quickly and very loud. It took a few more years before I started to understand something that is rather a cliche in the music world, but very important. It's the notes you leave out that count. Yes, somebody like Eddie Van Halen, who passed away recently, with his incredibly quick tapping and pyrotechnics, was one of my early guitar heroes. But later on, I learned to appreciate the single note or two or three that B.B. King could make say so much more than somebody just trying to play as fast as they could. It's the notes you leave out that make the song. If you played all the notes at the same time, you'd end up making noise. When I was in college, I learned about a piece of experimental music called 4 minutes, 33 seconds by the composer John Cage. Debuted in basically a farmhouse theater in Woodstock in the 1950s, Woodstock, New York in the 1950s. 4 minutes, 33 seconds consists of a score of entirely 4-beat rests. It lasts 4 minutes and 33 seconds. People walked out of the debut performance. But in the music class I had in college, I read a newspaper account, a review. And part of what it noted was the shuffling feet, the noise of people leaving, the coughing. Years later, when I would study meditation for the first time, I recalled John Cage's piece. Now, some people say it's music and some people say it's not. But it does teach the very Buddhist-like lesson of paying attention, of trying to hear what you sometimes miss. As I talked about John Cage's composition with some of my small groups recently, one story surfaced of someone who heard the piece for the first time being performed in Harvard Square in Cambridge amid a bustling street scene. What is it that we hear as the composition when the concert hall is silent? But there's shuffling of feet and rustling of clothes and people walking across the floor and someone sneezing or coughing or yawning. And what's the music when it's performed outside with people walking to and fro and the car horns and the shuffling and the voices and the street noise? Sometimes it's what is not played that counts. When I was a teacher, I learned about what Elliot Eisner termed the null curriculum. What is not implicitly or explicitly taught in the curriculum becomes the null curriculum, what's left out. And what's left out can be a more powerful lesson than any lesson that is taught. If we never actually mention the real history of an America that was built on stolen land with labor from stolen people, then when we encounter that reality, it's much harder to swallow. It was a lesson that was conspicuous in its absence, wasn't it? What is never mentioned is very powerful. We strive to be diverse in our congregations and our religious association, yet very few of our websites or even walls of our churches have photographs of people of color, unless they happen to be the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We strive to be inclusive in our congregations and in our association, but very rarely is any language but English spoken or sung. What's left out is a very powerful lesson. Most of us are familiar with the concept of active listening. We pay attention. We repeat things that the other person says. We ask clarifying questions. But there's another level that goes even beyond active listening. It's paying attention to what is not said at all, to hearing what is completely left unspoken. What if all the notes are missing? What if something is never mentioned or never taught? What are the things that are not said at all? Sometimes those are the most important things. Nonverbal communication is over 50% of everything we communicate. When what we're trying to communicate is emotion, the percentage of nonverbal communication goes up to over 90%. So, given that how we feel is quite often the most important thing going on with us, if 90% of that communication of how we're doing, how we're feeling is nonverbal, we've got to learn to listen to what's not said. Facial expressions, body movement, posture, eye contact. We learn nonverbal communication and try and pay attention to it. And I wonder now, when we are physically not together at all, what the silence of our not being together means. I really wish we had been together this morning. The weather seemed like it was going to be too cold. And I know that, like me, you probably miss our community, being together, physically present to each other. It's part of how we sustain community. But we can't do that right now. And we may not be able to be together inside our church buildings for a good while yet. And there are silences among us. There are people we're not seeing in the ways we're together online or by phone. And that communication is powerful. Even when we're online, I can see you and hear you. If I call you on the phone, I can listen to you. And I can try and pay attention in your tone or in your movement, what you're not saying. When you are absent, when you are not present at all in any way, I really have a hard time knowing what your silence means. When we're physically present to each other and we choose to be quiet, sometimes our silence means we're afraid or embarrassed, or we don't feel safe. We're secure enough that we won't be seen or heard, even if we make ourselves and our needs and our thoughts and our emotions known. So it is very important for us to try and listen to each other and what's not being said. But when we're not together, how do we hear those things that aren't being said? Whether someone's afraid or feels unsafe, we just don't know. When we are together and we're physically present to each other, when things are not being said, we say there's an elephant in the room, or we notice how we can feel the tension. And then when some things are said, what's said sometimes isn't what's heard. And what we understand sometimes isn't what was meant. In all areas of our life, we listen deeply for truth, for meaning, some of us for God, and to each other. And when we hear silence, absence, it's the most difficult of all. I need you to speak to me, to tell me how we can be together, even when we can't physically be present to one another in the ways church communities usually are present to each other. If our congregation is to survive the pandemic, to be a thriving community when the pandemic is finished, we must find ways to thrive and be together and be present to each other during the pandemic. What those ways are can't be found in absence and silence. We've got to somehow communicate to each other. It's getting colder and it looks like we'll be able to be together outside less than I was hoping we would be able to. And it looks like we're not going to be able to gather indoors in any numbers still for quite a while. We're starting to hit another peak of this pandemic. So I need you, I ask you, I invite you to participate in the congregational life we're creating. It may not be optimal, but we owe it to ourselves to make it through this pandemic together so we can give ourselves a chance to thrive together when it's over. But if we dissipate, if we let go of each other, if in our absence, our silence can't speak anything, even things that aren't heard or spoken or said, we are going to lose touch in a way that we may not be able to recover. So I need you and I invite you to take part in ways that are different, online, by phone, in small gatherings of 1 or 2 or 3 or a handful of people outside, as best we can. And as we engage each other as best we can, let's make what we need known. Do we need more visits? Do we need more calls? Do we need things to be tried a different way? We can try. But if we have silence and absence, we have no idea what to make of it right now. So please, when we reach out, answer. If you need something, let us know. If you are present, even online, and I see you and I hear you, I gather information from more than just your words. I hear sometimes, as best I can, what's not said. But in your absence, I am left to wonder about the silence. And I have no one to ask if the lesson I'm learning by your absence and silence is the one you mean to teach. We all need each other. The only way we can continue as a community is if we intentionally participate. I'm here. I want you to be here too. One way or another, I hope to see you soon.